Johnny Carson was in the middle of interviewing Robert Redford when he saw her standing in the studio doorway. Joanne Copeland, his second ex-wife, the woman he hadn't spoken to in 8 years, was watching him from the shadows, and she wasn't supposed to be there. It was November 19th, 1980. The Tonight Show was running flawlessly that Wednesday evening. Johnny was at the top of his game, trading witty banter with one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Robert Redford was promoting his new film, Ordinary People. And the chemistry between the two men was electric. The studio audience of 350 was captivating, hanging on every word. 22 million viewers across America were tuned in, watching their favorite late-night host do what he did best. Then Johnny's eyes drifted past Redford's shoulder, and everything stopped. For just a fraction of a second, so brief that most viewers at home probably didn't even notice, Johnny Carson's legendary composure cracked. His smile faltered, his eyes widened slightly, and then, just as quickly, he recovered, turning his attention back to Redford with a joke about skiing that got a huge laugh from the audience. But the people who knew Johnny well saw it. Ed McMahon caught the momentary lapse and followed Johnny's gaze to the doorway. Doc Severinsen, the band leader, noticed Johnny's hand grip the edge of his desk just a little tighter. Fred de Cordova, watching from the control room, immediately grabbed his headset and started barking questions to security about who had been let into the studio. Because standing there, partially hidden by the stage curtain, wearing an elegant black dress and holding a small envelope in her trembling hands, was Joanne Copeland Carson. The woman Johnny had been married to for 9 years, the woman whose divorce from Johnny had been one of the messiest, most publicized splits in Hollywood history, the woman he'd sworn he would never speak to again after what happened in 1972. Joanne had been Johnny's second wife. They'd married in 1963, right when Johnny was taking over The Tonight Show and becoming America's king of late night. She'd been a former model, beautiful and sophisticated, exactly the kind of woman a rising star was supposed to marry. For a while, it had been perfect, or at least it had looked perfect from the outside. But behind closed doors, things were different. Johnny's obsession with work, his need for perfection, his inability to truly let anyone in, it had worn her down, and Joanne's own struggles, her feelings of being second place to a television show, her loneliness in a marriage where her husband was loved by millions but couldn't seem to love her the way she needed. It had created a toxic cycle that ended in a spectacular implosion. The divorce in 1972 had been brutal. Lawyers, accusations, leaked stories to the press. Johnny had paid a massive settlement. Some reports said over $1 million, an astronomical sum in the early 70s. And when it was finally over, when the papers were signed and Joanne had moved out of their Bel Air mansion, Johnny had made it clear to everyone around him her name was never to be mentioned in his presence again. 8 years of complete silence, no phone calls, no letters, no contact whatsoever. Johnny had moved on, married his third wife, Joanna, in 1972. He'd built an even bigger career, become even more successful, created an empire around himself. And Joanne, she'd disappeared from public life, moved to New York, and from what anyone could tell had tried to forget that her marriage to Johnny Carson had ever happened. So, what was she doing here? What could possibly have brought her back to this studio, to this show, to the man she'd once loved and then learned to hate? Johnny wrapped up the Redford interview with his trademark charm, thanked Robert for coming, and went to a commercial break. The moment the cameras cut, Johnny stood up from his desk and walked directly toward the doorway where Joanne was standing. The studio audience couldn't see what was happening. The cameras weren't rolling, but every crew member on that set turned to watch as Johnny Carson came face to face with the ghost of his past. "Joanne," Johnny said quietly, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions. "What are you doing here?" Joanne looked older than Johnny remembered. She was 52 now, and the years had etched themselves into the corners of her eyes. But she was still beautiful in that understated way that had first caught his attention all those years ago. Her hands were shaking as she held the envelope. "I'm sorry, Johnny," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I shouldn't be here. I know we agreed never to see each other again. But I had to come. I had to give you this, before it was too late." Johnny glanced at the envelope, then back at her face. "Before what was too late?" "Joanne, what's going on?" She handed him the envelope. "Just read it, please, and if you want me to leave after that, I'll leave. I'll never bother you again." Fred de Cordova appeared at Johnny's elbow. "Johnny, we've got 2 minutes until we're back on air. Do you want me to have security?" "No," Johnny interrupted, still looking at Joanne. "Give me 5 minutes. Extend the commercial break." Fred looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Johnny's tone stopped him. He nodded and disappeared back toward the control room. Johnny led Joanne away from the studio floor into a small hallway behind the set. They stood there in the dim light, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the studio, the audience chattering, the band warming up for the next segment, felt like they were coming from a different world. "You look good," Joanne finally said. "Success suits you. It always did." "Don't," Johnny said, not unkindly. "Don't do the small talk thing. You didn't come here after 8 years to tell me I look good." "What's in the envelope?" Joanne's composure cracked slightly. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "It's a letter from our daughter." Johnny froze. "We don't have a daughter, Joanne." "We did," she said quietly, "for 3 days in 1967. The world stopped spinning. Johnny felt like all the air had been sucked out of the hallway. "What are you talking about?" Joanne took a shaky breath. "I was pregnant in 1967. You were so busy with the show, traveling constantly, doing specials. I didn't tell you right away because I wanted to be sure. And then when I was 4 months along, I miscarried. I was alone when it happened. You were in Vegas doing a guest spot, and I didn't want to bother you." Johnny's face had gone completely pale. "You had a miscarriage and you never told me." "I was ashamed," Joanne said, tears flowing freely now. "The doctors said it was a girl. They asked if I wanted to see her, and I said yes. I held her for 3 days in the hospital, named her Catherine after your mother, and then I had them take her away, and I never spoke about it again. Not to you, not to anyone." "Why?" Johnny's voice was hoarse. "Why would you keep that from me?" "Because you were becoming Johnny Carson," Joanne said. "America's favorite host, the man who made everyone laugh, and I thought if I told you about Catherine, about losing her, it would break something in you, or worse, it wouldn't break you at all. You'd just add it to the list of things you didn't talk about, things you buried deep and never dealt with." Johnny opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written in Joanne's handwriting but addressed to Catherine. It was dated November 15th, 1967, 13 years ago. "I wrote that letter the day I left the hospital," Joanne explained. "I've carried it with me ever since, and last month I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 3. The doctors are hopeful, but there are no guarantees. And I realized that if I died without telling you about Catherine, without giving you this letter, I'd be taking our daughter's existence to my grave. She deserved better than that. You deserved better than that." Johnny read the letter slowly, his eyes moving across each line as if trying to commit every word to memory. It was a mother's letter to a daughter she would never raise. Joanne had written about her hopes, her dreams, her regrets. She'd written about how much she already loved this tiny person she'd barely gotten to hold. She'd written about Johnny, about how she wished Catherine could have known her father, about how she wished things had been different. When Johnny finished reading, he carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. His hands were steady now, but his eyes were red-rimmed. 13 years, he said quietly. "You've been carrying this alone for 13 years. "I thought I was protecting you," Joanne replied. "I thought I was being strong, but I was just being a coward. I was scared that if I told you, you'd see how broken I really was, and I couldn't stand the thought of you seeing me that way." Johnny looked at this woman he'd once loved, this woman he'd divorced with so much anger and bitterness, and suddenly all of that seemed to melt away. In its place was something he hadn't expected to feel, compassion. "Joanne, we lost a child together. That's not something you protect someone from. That's something you share. That's something you grieve together." "I know that now," she said, "but back then I didn't. Back then I was so lost in trying to be the perfect wife for the perfect host that I forgot how to just be human with you." A production assistant appeared at the end of the hallway. "Mr. Carson, they really need you back on set. The commercial break is almost over." Johnny held up a hand without looking away from Joanne. "Tell them to play another commercial. Tell them to play 10 if they have to." The assistant disappeared, and Johnny turned his full attention back to Joanne. "How bad is it, the cancer?" "Bad enough that I'm having treatment. Good enough that I might beat it. The doctors say 50-50 odds." She tried to smile. "Better than Vegas, right?" Johnny didn't smile back. "What do you need? Money for treatment. I can make calls, get you the best doctors." "I don't need money, Johnny. I'm okay financially. What I needed was to tell you about Catherine. To stop carrying this secret alone, and to say I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For everything. For not telling you about the baby. For letting our marriage fall apart without fighting for it. For all those terrible things I said during the divorce. For making you into the villain when really we were both just two broken people who didn't know how to fix each other." Johnny was quiet for a long moment. In the distance, they could hear the show continuing without him. Ed McMahon doing an extended bit with the audience to buy time. "I wasn't a good husband to you," Johnny finally said. I loved my work more than I loved anything else, including you. I put the show first, always, and when things got hard between us, instead of trying to fix it, I just worked more, stayed at the studio later, took more trips. I blamed you for being unhappy, but I never asked myself why you were unhappy in the first place. We were young, Joanne said. We thought success would be enough. We thought if we looked perfect from the outside, eventually we'd feel perfect on the inside. And instead, we just got better at hiding, Johnny finished. They stood in silence, two people who'd once shared a life together, acknowledging the ruins of what they'd built and destroyed. Can I ask you something? Joanne said. Do you ever think about what we could have been if we'd done things differently? Johnny considered the question carefully. Sometimes, usually late at night, when the show is over and everyone's gone home, I think about the moments when we were happy, really happy, not just performing happiness for cameras and dinner parties. There were good moments, Joanne agreed softly. Sunday mornings when you'd make terrible pancakes and we'd read the paper together, the night we drove to Malibu at midnight just to watch the ocean, the way you'd practice your monologues in the shower and make me laugh even when I was angry at you. Johnny smiled, a real smile, not the performer's smile he wore on camera. I remember those pancakes. They were terrible, weren't they? The worst, Joanne laughed through her tears. But you were so proud of them. Fred appeared again at the end of the hallway, looking panicked. Johnny, we really need you. We're running out of content. I'll be right there, Johnny called back. Then he turned to Joanne. Will you stay? Watch the rest of the show from backstage? I don't think that's a good idea, Joanne said. This isn't my world anymore. It never really was. Just stay, Johnny insisted. Please, after the show we can talk more. Really talk, about Catherine, about everything. You didn't come all this way just to hand me a letter and disappear again. Joanne hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I'll stay. Johnny did something then that surprised both of them. He pulled Joanne into a hug, holding her the way he should have held her 13 years ago when she lost their daughter, when they were going through the worst moment of their lives and facing it separately instead of together. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he whispered. I'm sorry you went through that alone. I'm sorry for all of it. Me too, Joanne whispered back. Me too. When Johnny returned to the stage, something was different. The audience could see it, even if they couldn't name it. There was a softness to him that hadn't been there before the commercial break, a vulnerability that made him seem more human, more real. He finished the show with grace, thanked his guests, said goodnight to America. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he didn't do what he usually did, retreat to his dressing room or head straight home. Instead, he found Joanne waiting in the green room, and they talked until 3 in the morning. They talked about Catherine, about the daughter who existed for 3 days and would be remembered forever. They talked about their marriage, the good parts and the bad parts, the moments of love and the moments of pain. They talked about regret and forgiveness, and how sometimes the people we hurt the most are the ones we once loved the best. Joanne beat the cancer. She lived another 18 years, and during that time, she and Johnny maintained a quiet friendship that nobody outside their inner circle knew about. They never remarried. Both had moved on to other lives, other relationships, but they had something more valuable than romance. They had peace. Every year, on November 15th, the anniversary of Catherine's birth and death, Johnny would receive a letter from Joanne, just a few lines remembering their daughter. And every year, Johnny would write back. When Joanne passed away in 1998, Johnny was at her funeral. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention to himself. He simply sat in the back row and mourned the woman who had taught him that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to remember with compassion instead of anger. And in his pocket, carefully folded, was the letter Joanne had written to Catherine 31 years earlier. The letter that had brought them back together, not as lovers, but as two people who had shared something profound and painful and ultimately transformative.